Lucas sat at the kitchen table, stirring his coffee in slow, deliberate circles. The morning sun streamed through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow over the sleek granite countertops. Across from him, Rachel scrolled through her phone, barely acknowledging his presence. The once lively conversations over breakfast had long since withered into a routine of silent neglect. He watched her, analyzing her movements as if she were a puzzle he had already solved. The way she barely looked up when he spoke, the way she sighed whenever he tried to engage her in conversation. She had become indifferent, convinced that he was nothing more than a fixture in her life, a man she could take for granted. Lucas had stopped trying months ago. The arguments, the resentment, the subtle jabs. It was exhausting. But instead of fighting, he had done something far more dangerous. He had begun planning. Rachel let out an exasperated sigh and tossed her phone onto the table. "I have a brunch with Marissa today," she announced, as though Lucas should care. "It's important, you know, networking. You don't mind handling things here, do you?" She didn't wait for an answer. She never did. Lucas nodded absently, masking the satisfaction that curled in his chest. He had been waiting for this. Another day where she would be too distracted, too confident in her control over him, to notice what was happening right under her nose. As soon as the front door closed behind her, he set his coffee down and moved with quiet efficiency. In the past few weeks, he had done everything methodically. His name was no longer on their joint accounts. The house, once theirs, was now his alone. She had been too preoccupied with her social calendar to notice the papers she had signed. The storage unit was packed. The new apartment lease had been finalized, and today was the day he disappeared from her life entirely. Lucas took one last look around the house, the walls echoing with memories of a love that had faded into something hollow. By the time Rachel came home, the life she had grown so comfortable in would be gone. And for the first time in years, Lucas felt something close to joy. Lucas moved with the precision of a man who had rehearsed every step 100 times. He walked into the bedroom where Rachel's side of the closet still held the designer clothes she obsessed over. Each dress, each pair of heels, each handbag, expensive trophies of a life she believed she had mastered. But she hadn't noticed the small, crucial his suits, his ties, the leather duffel bag she had once given him for their anniversary, gone. The watch she had claimed was too expensive for everyday wear sat on the dresser, ticking away the seconds, until she realized she had lost everything. The divorce papers, neatly stacked on the glass coffee table, were the final touch. No dramatic confrontation, no last words, just silence. He wanted her to feel the emptiness when she walked in, to understand in that moment that she had underestimated him. He gathered the last of his things, a small box of personal items, his laptop, and a folder with all the documents proving he had tied up every loose end. No debts in his name, no shared assets she could claim. By the time she grasped what had happened, she would have nothing left to fight over. Lucas stepped outside, inhaling the crisp morning air as he loaded the last box into his car. A clean break. No pleading, no anger, no pointless explanations. Just the cold reality of her own arrogance. He glanced at his phone. A text from his lawyer confirmed what he already knew. Rachel wouldn't be able to contest anything. The accounts she once relied on had been transferred, the investments liquidated, and her name removed from the house's deed weeks ago. The keys she carried were now useless. She had assumed he would always be there, waiting, enduring. She had thought he was weak, a man too resigned to leave. But she had never realized the quiet strength of patience, the kind that allows a man to plan his escape in plain sight. As Lucas pulled out of the driveway, he didn't look back. By the time Rachel returned that evening, her heels clicking against the marble floor, the emptiness of the house hit her like a slap. The absence of noise, the missing furniture, the barren closet. It was a slow, creeping horror. Then she saw the papers. Her breath caught as she stepped forward, her manicured fingers trembling as she reached for the envelope with his signature already inked. The realization settled over her like a suffocating weight. He was gone. And for the first time in her life, Rachel had no control. Rachel stood frozen in the center of the empty living room, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The silence was suffocating. She turned in slow circles, scanning the space as if refusing to believe what her eyes were telling her. The couch was gone. The framed pictures that once decorated the mantel had vanished. Even the scent of him, the faint trace of his cologne that usually lingered in the air, was absent. Her gaze fell to the divorce papers on the coffee table. The neat stack of legal documents seemed almost smug in their finality, as if mocking her for never seeing this coming. She reached for them with trembling fingers, flipping through the pages in a frantic haze. This isn't happening. Rachel stumbled back onto the lone chair left in the room, pressing her hands against her temples. How had he done this? How had Lucas, the man she thought would never leave, managed to disappear so completely? Her mind raced through the past few weeks, searching for signs, any indication that he had been planning this. But she had been too consumed with her own world, too confident in his passivity. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. Lucas, this isn't funny. Call me back, we need to talk. She sent a text, then another, then 10 more, each one delivered, but none received a reply. Heart-pounding, Rachel tried calling their bank. The robotic voice on the other end sent a chill down her spine. This account is no longer active. She tried the second account. Same result. A fresh wave of panic surged through her. She grabbed her laptop, logging into their online banking, only to be greeted with a message that her login credentials were invalid. Her breath hitched. No. She clicked on their joint investment account, only to find it locked out. Her fingers moved faster, desperation making her reckless. Mortgage records, property deeds. Everything pointed to one simple, devastating truth. Lucas had outmaneuvered her. The realization struck her like a physical blow. She had spent years assuming he was predictable, assuming he would always be there. And now, she was left with nothing but an empty house and a cold legal document spelling out the end of her marriage. Rachel let out a shaky laugh, one filled with disbelief. He planned this. He planned all of it. She had been so sure of her control, so certain that Lucas would never find the nerve to leave. Yet here she was, locked out of the life she had taken for granted. Her hands clenched around the divorce papers as she whispered the words she'd never thought she'd say. It really left me, and for the first time in her life, Rachel felt something she had never experienced before. Rachel paced the empty living room, her heels clicking against the cold floor. The walls, once lined with framed photos of a life she had taken for granted, now stood bare, mocking her. She gripped her phone in her hand, her fingers white-knuckled from the force of her grip. Lucas wasn't answering. He was really gone. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Rage, disbelief, fear. How could he do this to her? How could he leave without a fight? No begging, no dramatic confrontation, just nothing. Rachel tried calling their friends, her voice calm, controlled. Hey, have you heard from Lucas? One by one the responses came in, and with each one her stomach twisted tighter. No, haven't talked to him in weeks. Is everything okay? Last time I saw him, he seemed different. Of course he had been different. He had been plotting, planning, hiding everything in plain sight. Her frustration mounted as she reached out to her sister, Emma. John left, Emma. Rachel spat into the phone. He's gone. I came home and the house is empty. He took everything. There was a long pause before Emma finally spoke. Rachel, you didn't see this coming? Rachel's stomach clenched. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Emma let out a breath. I mean, you've been acting like Lucas would always be there. You talk about him like he's furniture, something you don't notice until it's missing. Rachel's fingers tightened around the phone. That's not true, isn't it? Emma's voice was softer now. You checked out of that marriage a long time ago. You assumed he would never leave no matter what. But people don't just walk away overnight, Rach. He must have been planning this for a while. Rachel's throat felt tight. The thought of Lucas, her Lucas, secretly orchestrating his escape sent a chill down her spine. How had she not seen it? She hung up and threw her phone onto the couch, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Her entire body felt restless, buzzing with unspent energy. She needed control. She needed to fix this. She opened her laptop, determined to track him down, to force him to face her. She typed in his email, but the account was deactivated. She tried searching for his new address. Nothing. It was as if he had erased himself from her world. Rachel swallowed hard. The life she had built, the stability she had taken for granted, was slipping through her fingers, and for the first time in her life she realized she had no power here. Rachel sat motionless in the empty house, her mind spiraling between disbelief and growing dread. The divorce papers still lay on the coffee table, crisp and cold, demanding acknowledgement. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating her with their emptiness. How had she let this happen? She had spent years believing Lucas would never leave her, that no matter how indifferent she became, no matter how many times she dismissed him with a wave of her hand, he would remain, patient and unshaken. She had assumed his silence meant submission, that his lack of arguments meant acceptance. But she had been wrong. Lucas hadn't just left, he had vanished, severing every tie with calculated precision. He had planned this meticulously, removing her from their accounts, stripping her of access to anything that had once been shared. She hadn't just lost her husband, she had lost her safety net, her entire foundation. Her phone buzzed beside her, a tiny lifeline in the sea of emptiness. She lunged for it, desperate, praying that it would be Lucas. But instead it was a message from her bank. Final notification. Your account has insufficient funds for this transaction. Rachel blinked, her stomach lurching. She opened her banking app, her fingers trembling. Her personal account, where she had expected a comfortable cushion, was nearly empty. Panic surged through her. She clicked on their old joint accounts. Access denied. Investment accounts locked out. Lucas had drained everything. She stood abruptly, the room spinning as she tried to breathe through the wave of shock. She had always assumed she had financial control. Lucas made good money, but he had always been practical, never one for extravagance. She, on the other hand, had spent freely. Designer clothes, weekend getaways, lunches with her social circle. But she had never considered what would happen if the money stopped flowing. She dialed her lawyer with shaking hands. The receptionist's voice was overly polite, almost rehearsed. "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter, but Lucas filed all necessary paperwork weeks ago. The division of assets has already been finalized." "Finalized?" Rachel's voice came out in a choked whisper. "That's not possible. I never signed anything." A pause. "You did, Miss Carter. Your name was removed from the property deed and joint assets with your signature, on documents from months ago." Rachel staggered backward, gripping the edge of the couch for support. The paperwork Lucas had casually handed her weeks ago. She had barely glanced at it, too busy messaging her friends, too disinterested to care. Her own arrogance had cost her everything. The receptionist cleared her throat. "You may wish to retain separate counsel if you want to dispute anything, but from what I can see, there's little to contest. Lucas ensured all assets were legally secured under his name before filing." Rachel barely heard the rest. She dropped the phone onto the couch, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't a mistake. This was a punishment. Lucas had given her nothing to fight over, nothing to negotiate. He had left her with exactly what she had given him in the last few years. Nothing. For the first time in her life, Rachel felt helpless. She sat there for what felt like hours, her mind reeling. The house, which she had once decorated to showcase her status, now felt like an empty shell. Like a cruel reminder of how quickly power could be lost. A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Maybe it was Lucas. Maybe he had come back. She rushed to open it, only to find her best friend Marissa standing there with a puzzled expression. "Rachel, I just saw Lucas at a coffee shop downtown," Marissa said hesitantly. "He looked different, happy, like he was free." Rachel swallowed the lump in her throat. "Did he say anything?" Marissa hesitated. "No, but when I said hi, he just smiled and walked away." Rachel's chest tightened. The final blow wasn't just that Lucas had left, it was that he had moved on, without a second thought, and for the first time, Rachel truly understood the weight of consequences.